Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this technical briefing on the status of the Port Dalhousie Piers. From Fisheries and Oceans Canada today I have Mike McDermott, who's the Senior Project Engineer for the Small Craft Harbours Program, and as well Mark Sandeman, who's the Area Manager for the Small Craft Harbours Program, and joining us as well is Andrea Sear, who's the Associate Regional Director General of the Central and Arctic region. So what I will do is I will turn it over to Mike and Andrea to brief us today.
Hi there. So thanks a lot for joining us. Am I okay from a volume perspective? Everyone can hear me? Great. So I just wanted to welcome you, to thank you for joining us today, and also wanted to thank Mayor Senzik for inviting us today and allowing us to use the facility to do this briefing. It, I think, is a very good opportunity to provide the briefing. Seeing that it is spring now, gives us the opportunity to provide an update and just inform you of some of the work that's been done over the past number of months and our understanding of the conditions of all of the infrastructure at the Port Dalhousie Piers. So from a background perspective, as you may or may not be aware, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, which I'll probably be referring to as DFO, owns the Small Craft Harbour, including the Port Dalhousie Marina, the Lakeside Park, and the Port Dalhousie Yacht Club. And the city of St. Catharines leases all of those holdings. It's, from our program perspective, it's considered a non-core harbour. Core harbours are harbours that support the commercial fishing industry, and non-core harbours are harbours that don't. And there's probably a way more specific definition that Mark or Mike could give you, but that's my simple explanation of it. So Port Dalhousie is included in our DFO list of harbours to be divested. And so the next slide just gives you a bit of a visual representation. The red line basically circles the areas that, as I said in the previous slide, that DFO owns and the city leases and manages. So the history of piers, they have a long history. They were originally constructed in the 1840s as part of the second Welland Canal. The channel was made deeper for the third Welland Canal, and the piers, we believe, were rebuilt approximately in the 1870s, but the exact history is not as detailed. The piers basically are what we call timber crib rock-filled piers. So basically, if you imagine a timber box, an empty timber box, then filled with rocks, and then a cement top on top of that. The original concrete deck was added in the 1900s, and as you may know or see from the previous slide, we've got about 600 meters on the west side and 700 meters on the east side. Between 1993 and 95, substantial repairs were made to those east and west piers, and various deck repairs, rehabilitations have taken place over the past 30 years. From a DFO perspective, we've continuously monitored, investigated, and maintained the site, and we have invested probably about $2 million since 1990 at the various parts of the site. In the fall of 2014, we commissioned a condition assessment of the existing piers on both sides of the harbour entrance. Basically, although there was nothing to imply to us that there was a problem, simply put, they're old piers, and we felt that it was important that we get an understanding of their condition simply based on their age. The condition assessment was undertaken, and there was a general inspection of the piers above and below the water line, a geotechnical investigation of the site, and the plan to provide recommendations for use restrictions and or required repairs. It started with a dive inspection for the parts that are underwater, but that dive inspection quickly yielded concerns that a dive inspection wasn't actually a safe way to inspect the piers, given the condition that they were in. The decision was made that it was more appropriate and safer to do that inspection via a technique that's called side scan sonar, which basically involves, well, Michael explained that. It basically is a less hands-on and more technical review of those piers. So the condition assessment of the remaining DFO-owned structures was completed in the summer and fall of 2015. That basically on that map that we showed is all of the inner harbor pieces that weren't part of the original pier investigation. Hydraulic analysis was also done because when we looked at the piers, when we've identified the potential for pier repairs, we needed to then determine what options were actually viable from a hydraulic perspective, recognizing that any changes to the piers can result in changes to currents, changes to water levels, and other changes to the water body that those piers are in. So those results were finalized in January, February of this year. And I'll pass it to Mike to talk about what those investigations revealed.
All right, thanks, Andy. So as everyone's aware, I mean, the investigation did show severe deterioration of the substructure of the piers, which, as Andrea alluded to, was not expected. We did inspect them due to the age, but once we got in there, we quickly realized that they were in a lot worse condition than we had originally anticipated. So as part of AECOM, which was the engineering firm that undertook the work, we alluded to the fact that we'd asked them to provide either repairs or restrictions, and they came back with recommendations that both piers should be completely restricted. For vehicular access, they didn't want boats mooring against them, and then other large sections they restricted to pedestrian access. The side scan sonar revealed that there was areas where those concrete boxes that Andrea was referring to, the one sides were completely gone, and the rock was starting to spill out, which meant that there was nothing supporting the concrete above it. And then the subsequent investigation, which took place in the last year, also identified some other areas of concern in the inner harbor, in addition to what we had noticed on the pier. Was there more? Go ahead. So just to give you a quick kind of an idea of what we're looking at. So this is kind of a picture of what we'll call it a healthy pier. Typical wharf section, again, this is the timber box with the rocks in it, and then you've got a concrete kind of mass structure on top of that, and then a concrete deck on top of that. What we've got happening is the one side of the timber cribs the timber's either completely rotted or pulled away, and these rocks are starting to spill out. And because of that, some of the concrete up top, that's starting to go as well. So these are kind of the really telling pictures. This is the side scan sonar that Andrea was referring to earlier. Ultimately, it's just an underwater picture is really what it is in layman's terms. And so what it really shows, if you look at the darkened areas, is you've got some areas where, as I mentioned, the timber crib has completely disintegrated or deteriorated, and the rock is starting to pour out. So you can see these kind of fluffy sections. So they're not clouds, it's rock that's actually spilling out. So where you see the darkened sections, those are literally holes where there should be rock and timber supporting the deck, and they are no longer there. So it was a major concern. It's the same thing on both sides. It's kind of zoomed in a bit more. Again, you've got these darkened sections where there's nothing, and areas where the rock is spilled completely out, and there's nothing supporting the superstructure, the upper part of the east or the west. You've got areas on both sides of the east and the west pier.
I think in this one also really illustrates where the concrete block itself has fallen based on the fact that there's nothing to support it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. So, in the interest of public safety, last year, based on what we had seen, AECOM had recommended that we needed to restrict access to pedestrian access to the east and west piers, and remove the mooring cleats so that boats were not encouraged to moor there. And unfortunately, we need to keep those east and west piers barricaded because they do pose a risk to the public. So we did look at some temporary repair options, but nothing that we looked at, and AECOM was heavily involved in this, could guarantee public safety. There was some temporary solutions that were looked at, but nothing could guarantee that. The big concern with the piers, as much as I've been talking about that they're not supported in terms of the rock underneath them, the greater fear, that there's not as much fear of the deck necessarily failing this way with people walking on it, because they are reinforced deck. The bigger concern is because they are reinforced, with everything spilling out, if the wharf starts to tilt, because the deck is reinforced, it'll take huge sections of the pier with it. You're not just going to have a localized failure. The whole thing is going to tumble in. And obviously, if there's people anywhere near that, it could be catastrophic. So again, none of these temporary solutions could alleviate that concern. There was also some areas, and I've got a map after this that'll show you, that's part of the recent investigation where AECOM has indicated they just want to keep vehicles away from. So again, it's vehicular access to certain areas. One of them is on the east concrete wall, which is basically where the Port Dalhousie Yacht Club is, or sorry, the Dalhousie Yacht Club, where their fueling station is. There's a section on the southwest wall, I believe it's the parking lot near the Legion, and then the Lakeside Park Wharf, which is basically the extension of the West Pier, just kind of as you come around the corner. Again, this east concrete wall, this is where the fueling station, as I mentioned, sits. We will have to go back in the spring. We want to see what's happened over the winter to see if that wall has moved any more, because if it has, that creates a greater concern. Again, an environmental concern as well, because there are fuel storage tanks behind that. So we will be going back in probably any time to check that to see what's happened. But with that recommendation, with that investigation, AECOM has recommended that rehabilitation will need to take place within a year. So the question will be, do we need to do it immediately in the spring, or can we make it through the season to come up with a proper solution? So again, the red sections here are where it's currently barricaded. If you're looking here, this is the southwest wall. So this is an area where we've asked for a 6-meter offset to keep vehicles away from. And then the section over here, the Dalhousie Yacht Club, that's the section that we're going to be going back to inspect in the spring. And then this is the Lakeside Park Wharf. Again, this is an area where we just asked for vehicles to be kept 6 meters back from the edge. Zoomed in picture again, same sort of idea. This gives you an idea of what a 6-meter offset looks like on either area. To be honest with you, both these areas, there's not much of a concern of vehicular traffic down there. Maybe some municipal vehicles in terms of loaders and stuff, but they're just doing landscaping along there, but there shouldn't be much of an impact there. And then this is the east concrete wall we'll be going back to look at. Again, vehicles aren't driving right up to the edge, but we'll be looking at that in the spring to see if there's any further concerns. So in terms of long-term solutions, there's basically 3 that have been considered that AECOM has looked at. One is encapsulation with a rock fill stabilizing berm. So that's essentially, if you've got the top of the wharf, you're basically piling rock in front of it to keep it upright. And you'd run that along the wall and prevent it from failing, as I talked about before, into the channel. Partial decommission and conversion to a breakwater, that is essentially the same thing, except you'd lose your concrete deck, you basically rubble the whole thing over. So you have what people would typically call a breakwater. That's basically a big rock mound, and that would be the second option. And then the third option is steel sheet pile, so essentially driving steel sheet pile in front of the existing structure and giving it a vertical wall. All of these options give you in excess of 50 years of life expectancy, so would be true long-term solutions. But not any one of them needs to be chosen for all the structures. You can have a combination of the 3 and because certain areas require certain things. The hydraulic study looked at all three options as well and determined that the concern was that by constricting the channel, we may cause either the velocities in the channel to increase or potentially cause flooding upstream. But fortunately, that has come back and says that all three options are viable and can be used. They won't have an impact on the channel. Pictorially, what I was discussing, again, concrete deck with rock in front of it, and that again just stabilizes and keeps the pier standing, so it's not a concern. This is a picture of it, Port Mainland, I guess, kind of southwest of here. Again, you've got a nice concrete deck with your rock berm on the side, keeping it standing. This is the decommissioning pier, again, turning it into a rubble mound breakwater, so the rock essentially just goes completely over. There's a picture of it. Again, same sort of idea, rock berm on either side and rock over the top. And then steel sheet pile, essentially you're driving a new wall in front of the existing pier or wharf. It's hard to, you can't really see it from the side, but essentially that's what it gives you. It gives you a vertical face with the concrete deck. Comparing the three methodologies, ultimately with the rock berm and the steel sheet pile, you are maintaining pedestrian access. You can still walk along it, but with the decommissioned pier, that's obviously why they've given it that name. Again, you'd have rock over the top, so people will be walking across it. In terms of mooring, when you've got the rock berms, obviously those options, boats can pull up and dock along there. The only one that would allow that would be the steel sheet pile, because again, you have a vertical face. And then in terms of the channel flow constriction, again, this was the hydraulic analysis. It determined there was some constriction, but it didn't have a significant impact on the flow within the channel or any flooding concerns or anything upstream. I'll just throw it back to Andrea.
So we have had some initial studies done, some what we call Class D estimates, which are very, very early estimates of cost. And with any of the three options, we're looking at costs between $23 million and $33 million, depending on which type of repair is selected for which parts of the piers. Unfortunately, that cost far exceeds our annual funding available within our small craft harbors operating budget. However, there are, in conjunction with partners, there are ways for us to look for additional funding for that. We're working collaboratively with the city to assess the repair options and take into account all of the information that we really finally have collected at this point. Really what we want to do is have a continuous dialogue with the public, with the people of St. Catharines to make sure that people are aware of the situation and are aware of any opportunities to input as we move forward in consultations. And so we are planning community consultations in the near future. We don't have a specific timeline for those consultations, but we are actively moving forward on establishing a timeline and working with the community to identify our way forward. So really with that, I will open things up to questions, and one of us will try and answer any questions that anyone has. And I think Hillary's going to repeat any questions so that they get recorded properly.
I guess we're talking some long-term repair work possibly. So I assume this year they're going to remain closed this summer? That would be a given?
So the question was, will the piers remain closed this summer?
Yes, so the piers will remain closed this summer. None of the options available to us would allow us to open them this year for sure. And as you saw from our slides and our explanations, there is a true public safety concern if they were to have access, either vehicular people or boat mooring.
What's the timeline if you chose option number 3 from start to finish?
So the question was, what is the timeline for option number 3 from start to finish?
And I don't have those numbers for us, and I think that it's important to note that the chances are that we would have some hybrid of the options. But really, from a construction timeline perspective,
Yeah, I mean, to get to the point where we're actually starting construction, you've got significant lay time. I mean, sorry, it's a tough question to answer because as you're doing repairs, obviously you're going to want to target areas and try and keep as much of the facility open as possible as you're doing that. So in terms of staggering it, it can span quite a long time. So it's hard to give a definitive answer, but you're looking at a couple of years minimum to get started and get going, right?
our hope is to determine the way forward and to do the engineering work required in the next year, which will then allow us to move forward. But we do need to do that stepwise.
So what is that engineering work that you still have to do now that you have the scans and this information?
So the question was, what is the engineering work that remains to be done?
It's the design itself. So the methodology will be identified through our consultations and as we move forward. But then in likening it to a house construction project, it goes from we're going to build a house to blueprints to build the house.
So would you be doing the design for all 3 options, or you're just looking at?
No, we'll be doing the consultation first and then using the results of that consultation to inform the engineering work.
What are the other funding options then that you were referring to?
The question was, what are the other funding options?
I think there's different partnerships that we would look at. Part could come through our departmental divestiture program, where we would potentially be able to receive funding for work that would allow us to divest the facility. There are also possible partnerships with other provincial organizations, other federal departments, and with the city.
Before the election, we were told by the local MP at the time that the DFO would be paying for fixing the piers. So has anything changed since the election, or?
So the question was, has anything changed since the election with regards to funding the piers?
I don't have the words in front of me, but I believe that the words were that DFO would work to look for funding, not that DFO would be funding it, and recognizing that we could be a significant part of that funding, but we wouldn't necessarily be all of it.
Is it fair to say that the detailed inspections, that this is actually worse than was originally anticipated?
So the question was, is the result of the detailed inspections worse than what was anticipated?
I think it's simply put, yes. We expected to see a level of deterioration, but we were surprised by the extent. I'll let Mike give a little bit more technical answer to that, but
yeah,
simply yes.
That's true. It's again, you don't wait for failures to indicate that you've got a problem, but nothing had indicated that there was an issue. We had gone in, as Andrea alluded to earlier, we had decided to do the inspections because of their age, and there had been a period of time since we had done the last inspection, and there had been a local area where we had a small failure on the east side that kind of got us interested in what had caused that. So that precipitated the investigation.
I mean, my understanding is that as related to similar structures of similar age, it was surprisingly in worse condition.
When was the last time prior to this first inspection that they were inspected? Like, is it every 10 years? Is it every 15 years? It just seemed like it was the worst time ever to close down the piers. I mean, no time is a good time, but we really rely on them. And so when was it last inspected?
So the question was, when were the piers last inspected?
It's what I would call a continuous inspection process, but I'll turn things over to Mike or Mark for the detail on that.
Yeah, in terms of, I mean, we work closely with the municipality in terms of, they do manage the site and make us aware of situations if anything's obvious to them. I mean, we're certainly not expecting them to be in the water inspecting it. So, we will periodically, if we're down here, we'll drop by and see it unless something kind of makes us think about that. But the last, I guess, detailed fully in the water inspection was in the early 90s.
For clarification on Councilor Bello's first question, my understanding from what you're saying is that the timeline is based on the following steps. First, there has to be agreement on what option is chosen or combination of, and then once that's done, there's design work that has to be done to do that, and then the work starts on whatever option. Is that fair?
So the question was to elaborate on the details of the timeline for work.
So basically, yes. We need to first do the consultation. We would then move to do the detailed design work. We would once we are aware of the general design, we're also going to be more able to seek out funding, more able to potentially identify funding, because we're going to be working with a more pointy number, a more specific number to be seeking the funding for. And yes, the design will have to be fully complete before construction were to begin.
What are you hoping to get out of the public consultations? Because I would think most people, like members of the public, would say they want a pier that they can walk on. So what are you hoping to?
So the question was, what are you hoping to get out of the consultations?
I think we do need to know what the public's desired use is, recognizing that our assumption is that there is a desire to walk on what I would say is all or part of the two piers, recognizing that this is a cost to Canadians, this is a cost to local taxpayers, and so if there are things that are priorities, then we can focus on making those priorities reality versus doing the biggest, most expensive version that may end up being larger or more than is really desired.
So there potentially could be a kind of a hybrid thing where one pier might be open eventually, both part of both might be open. There could be a combination of solutions, right?
Absolutely. There's a full spectrum of what can be done within those three solutions, and the two piers can be treated differently, and even different sections of single piers can be treated differently. Actually, I think that one diagram, even though it was showing the rubble mound, doesn't it actually have the second part of it not?
Yeah.
Flip forward for a sec, please.
Trying to get the picture here.
Yeah, so this one, for example.
Sorry, it's a little finicky.
This one, for example, I believe actually, and even if it doesn't, we can just use our imaginations because I haven't been there, so we can just pretend. But for example, in this one, we've got rubble mound for part of it. That doesn't mean you can't have steel.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just going to try and find it for you.
So you can't have steel sheet for the rest of it. For example, with the mooring aspect of it being a priority, if it's determined that we want to have mooring capacity on one side and not on the other. So it really becomes a hybrid of options that ideally are the most effective cost options that will meet the needs and the desires of the community.
How long do you expect, and when do you expect these consultations to start? Because to me, it's just another staggering, like people want something done. So when you say consultations, do you mean you're going to have them within the next month, or what's the projection?
So the question was, what is the projection timeline for the beginning of the consultations and how long will they last?
Right.
Our plan is to start very soon, and probably, make sure that we're doing them from a timing perspective when we are actually going to have people attend, but really, absolutely in the next few months, potentially very soon, potentially a little bit further out, but we need to obviously put this in our work plan. We know that we're going to do it. We want to make sure that we're timing it at the most appropriate time to get the input in the most effective way possible.
And are you
We're
having
not intending to, we don't intend to put this off.
Okay, you're not going to drag it out, like, is there going to be a couple consultations, like?
That's what we're in the
Okay.
process of
Figuring out,
identifying, and so we haven't done that very specific work planning as of yet that will allow us to say whether it's going to be 1 or 2 or 3 and when exactly, but the plan is to do something in a short time frame that will allow us to effectively consult, so that we can move forward and start developing these plans.
Thank you.
Andrea, I would just say that in terms of your point about making sure that it's an appropriate time to get the people out, believe me, this is of such interest to the community. You could have it in the middle of January and you'd have the same number of people.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where we have, the advantage. I think we, working with the city and having engagement at the city level, we can really work together to make sure that we're doing it right.
And I think the closer it gets to summer, the more angrier the people will be, so I would suggest springtime, don't you?
We take that suggestion. Thank you.
Not to be me, I'm just.
No, I know.
I
I'm
just
not-
think,
no,
because when
I-
it gets to that, it becomes a really sore spot and the wound gets opened more and more. So if they see that you're proactively doing something, or we're all proactively doing something as a team, I think, it's gonna help close that wound a little bit,
Yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah. And this is the reason we're here today is to start that and to let people know that we are going to be doing the consultation, which alerts them and gets them keyed to that, and so that people do know that we're doing things and even can provide us unsolicited information on their views.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Thanks very much. We really appreciate you coming in today.
Thanks a lot.
Do you want to take up some individual questions, or are you looking to ask any individual questions of the group? Because they can go off. We can do an off to the side if you want. Okay. They'll stick around
And,
for a bit.
we'll be here for a bit, and you can always contact us by phone as well. I'm quite happy to discuss it with anyone.
All right. Andrew, thank you very much to you and your team for coming here and doing this. From the media's perspective, we've been working closely through the staff on this issue. This is not something obviously we've taken lightly. It does seem like there is a long horizon, but the information had to be discovered in terms of the underwater, and we have Brian Schnell here, who is the lead inside the city, and making sure that we had all information on the interior of the harbor and the piers were critical, because the last thing we wanted to do is start focusing with DFO on repairs on one section and discover that there was additional sections that were in need of repair. So we have a complete picture, and I think it's important for the community to understand, is there's now a complete picture of the entire harbor plus piers. And this gives us now it gives us the data that is required to look at the options that are available. It's the balance between the affordability of the entire project and the abilities for us to meet the expectations of the public. We can't simply just have a recreation of what's already there if the cost is so prohibitive that it would make us all look fiscally irresponsible. So we want to make sure that the consultations includes all aspects of the interior harbor plus exterior piers, so that the public has a firm understanding of the information and the design work that's going to be required to bring these piers back to a state in which the public for the next 50 years can use the piers. So It's going to be a long process, but unfortunately, it's had to have started now, and we'll work towards a completion date. But it's important that public consultation takes place. The design work that's going to be required. Anyone who thinks that design work is easy is not easy. You've got EA studies that are going to have to take place. We all know when you deal with water and land, it triggers a whole bunch of different studies that are going to take place. So I think during the consultation process, it's important that we establish the timelines for the public so that the expectations are that there's going to be steps that have to take place. If for a reference point for those in the media, Chacluna project is an excellent example of all the steps that had to go through for Chacluna. It took years to get to a state where you could build, not for the city's fault, but having to go through all the regulatory burden of regulatory matters that are associated with water. That being said, hopefully by the summertime, the community will have an opportunity to focus on sort of the option moving forward. Council will have the option. The critical point here, the decision is going to be a decision of the federal government at this current time. We don't own the piers. So the decision hopefully will be influenced by our input and that of the MPs that represent us. They're going to play a critical role in making sure that the position of the city and the constituents are well understood. That's about it. So if you do media have other additional technical questions, we have Brian Scheinel, we have Jim Riddle, and we have Dan Dillon. Dan Dillon is the engineer who understands all the details. Jim's working on the secondary plan for Port Dalhousie, so how does this fit into the overall plan of Port Dalhousie? And Brian is the facilities, so he has the understanding of where we're going from a facilities maintenance point of view. So again, thank you for the opportunity, and councillors for joining as well. I'm sure you'll have questions that you can ask individually of the people here as well. I know Carlos has been here since the beginning, so he's, and the other point I'd like to make is that this is a St. Catharines project. It's not just a Port Dalhousie project. The piers belong to all of St. Catharines. It belongs to all the people, and in fact, it's a Niagara project. People come from far and abroad to use the piers, not just people in Port Dalhousie, but people across the city and across the region. So we want to make sure that we have something that'll continue to attract people to Port Dalhousie. And I think that's important to understand this. It's not a Port Dalhousie issue. This is a St. Catharines issue.
Well, is the region involved as well?
At this point in time, Mr. Scheinel, I don't know if you've gotten the region involved from any perspective of their information of the piers.
Not specifically, Mr. Mayor, but they certainly will be
in the loop.
Bringing it forward.
Okay. Anything else? All right, like I said, they'll be sticking around, so if you have any individual questions, feel free to ask.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.